Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I am Louise, I'm a watercolor artist. I really love watercolor paintings that have that loose, elegant simplicity to them, with large, bold strokes that look like they just sort of happened by accident, and just a few details that draw the eye in. This is the style that I'm working towards with my watercolor paintings, and sometimes I almost succeed, and most times I don't, but that's what makes the process so exciting for me. It's like an ongoing challenge. And today I thought I would demonstrate some of my recent watercolor sketches and also give you my best tips for how to practice this style yourself. For some reason, I felt called to paint chickens. I just find them so beautiful and so full of character. So I browsed Pinterest to find a bunch of different poses and colors that I liked, and I very loosely sketched them out with pencil on a large sheet of paper. This one is A3 size, which I think is around 12 by 16 inches. When I'm feeling brave, I sometimes don't do pencil sketches, but I sketch directly with watercolor. That gives it an even more loose and spontaneous look, which I really love, but that's kind of a different technique and a topic for another video. Actually, I did demonstrate that in another video, the one about my daily practice routine. I'll put a link to that in the description. But this time, since I hadn't painted watercolor for a while and felt a little stiff, I needed some basic guides in the form of just simple outlines and as few details as possible. I chose to do many little sketches on the same page as opposed to larger subjects because the smaller I paint, the easier it is for me to simplify what I see, and the larger I paint, the more details I'm tempted to put in. Painting many little subjects at once also lets me batch paint specific details, like I'm doing here with the red. While I have the color on my brush, I might as well put it down everywhere that I see it. And I'm doing the same with the feet, because the feet are all yellow and all of the birds, so. I'm experimenting with some salt here, which I've done a few times before. If you sprinkle salt on watercolor while it's still a bit wet, the salt soaks up the water, and when dried, it has this nice texture and pattern to it. And I really like that look in other people's paintings, but for some reason, I don't like it in my own. That's such a weird phenomenon that I often experience. It's the same with ink drawing. I love detailed, rendered ink drawings with lots of cross-hatching. But when I do it, even if I straight up copy someone else's drawing for practice, it just looks wonky. Maybe some people just have a way with a certain medium or technique and others don't. I don't know. Anyways, I tried salt on just a few of my chickens and then I skipped it on the rest of them. Because I like being able to go back in and add more shadows, and if there's salt there, you can't really do that. A great tip if you're aiming for that loose look is to use a bigger brush than you're comfortable with. These are quite small illustrations, and I'm using my number 12 round brush for most of the work here. It's my favorite brush. It's super versatile. I use it probably 80% of the time when I'm painting, because it can cover large areas, but it can also form a pretty fine tip for detail work. So I try to cover as much ground as possible with just one stroke to avoid having to fill in areas, which can give a more blotchy and uneven look. some points I switch to my number 6 round brush, but I try to stay away from my smaller brushes and always use a slightly bigger one because it reminds me that I'm not aiming for perfection. I'm going for simple, loose studies here that convey the posture and the motion more than the details. And it's like the brush does half the job for me. Simply put, the more loose and expressive you want your paintings, the bigger the brush you should use. Another benefit to painting a bunch of smaller illustrations like this is that I don't have to wait for the paint to dry before I can continue. And this is kind of an Achilles heel of mine. I'm just so impatient that I often go back into an area before it's fully dried and I mess it up. But working on several paintings at once, it solves that problem. And it's also a great learning tool. I did that a lot when I started out with watercolor. I used to tape a big sheet of paper into smaller squares. And then I multitasked 4 or even 8 little landscapes, for example. That way I could quickly apply what I learned in one sketch when I painted the next. And sometimes I would even do the same subject 3 or 4 times in a row. I've seen that called iterative drawing or iterative painting online, and that's exactly what it is. Instead of just one shot at a painting, you get several, and you get to really think about how you messed up and correct that in the next iteration. Super useful, and you can improve really fast by doing that. And it's kind of similar to what I'm doing here as well. I'm exploring different levels of abstraction to see what I like best, and different color combinations, different ways to shade or convey texture. In these final stages, I am allowing myself some more details. It's a good idea to hold off on details as long as you can, to do the painting in small steps, so that you can always stop and evaluate. Does it need more than this? Often the answer is no. It's so easy to overwork a watercolor painting because we're having fun and we think that more layers and more details will make it better. But there is beauty in simplicity too. And with watercolor, we lose some of the freshness of the paint every time we go back in and mess around. Another good tip: the more detail you have in one area of the painting, the less detail you should have everywhere else. Our eyes are naturally drawn to contrasts and details, and when we see an image with lots of that stuff happening everywhere, we don't really know where to look, and we can't rest our eyes on the image. Of course, with some types of art, that's the whole point. A lot of abstract art is like that. It's interesting to look at, but not necessarily pleasant or relaxing, and I don't think all art has to be pleasant to look at, but at least for this particular style of watercolor painting, it's good to lead the eye to a focal point where there is more detail and contrast, and then let the rest of the painting be more simplified. And my chickens are done. I like these two the most because I didn't go back in and fiddle too much with them. And that's exactly what I was talking about before. The most common way that we ruin our watercolor paintings is by constantly second-guessing ourselves and going back in and poking around with our brush. You can see the difference clearly here. These chickens who are loose and simple and clean in their brushwork, and these two that have a few layers of paint too many and have been fiddled with. I like the tail on the rooster though, it's nice and loose. If you have any questions or frustrations about watercolor that you'd like me to talk about, please tell me in the comments. I would love to include them in upcoming tutorials. Thanks for watching, thanks for hanging out with me today, and I'll see you in the next video.